Hello, my name is Corey Ross. If you follow my channel on YouTube, you know that I'm really a rigger, not an animator, but I've been working on my thesis film, which is about this character here called the Kusith, which is a Scottish mythological fairy dog. And a couple of my animators have had some issues with animating the tail. So this character's tail is like a braid of vines. So it's not really an anatomical tail. Um, we want it to be a little more whip-like, like a vine. But since it is connected to a creature, we want it to be convincing as well. Um, so really, it is a lot about getting nice overlapping action down the tail in walk cycles. So I figured since some of my animators had questions about it, I'd record a video and might as well post it here on YouTube as well, in case other people would like to learn a little bit about overlapping action. So again, I'm not an animator. There's probably this might not be the best way to do it, but it is my way of doing it. And I should also say that a lot of animation, especially when you get into character performance, is about posing, and you're telling your story and your character's motivation through posing. And then animators add in-betweens and spline it. This is not about posing. This is just about overlapping actions. So these poses aren't going to, we're not going to focus a lot on poses or getting really a dynamic pose. It's just about getting a convincing overlap in the tail. So I'll go ahead and get started. What we have here is a walk cycle. I'll just let it play for a little bit. So this walk cycle I did not animate. One of the animators in the film, Eva, did this walk cycle. When it stops at frame 80. So we're really only going to be worried about up to frame 80. I just have it bumped out, and you'll see why we have it bumped out, because we're going to need to see frames beyond it, because I find that having it bleed a little bit past where the animation stops makes it a little bit more convincing. So this walk cycle will be in a shot in the film. So let's just get started real quick. So if we play it again, and I'll just go to 80 so we can loop it, you can see there's a little bit of movement in that tail there. But really, it's not animated. It's just inheriting transforms from the hips, right? So that's kind of fun. So we want the rotation of the hips to drive overlapping action down the tail. So we'll set our first pose, and what we're going to do is we're just going to key one controller, offset the same animation from that one controller down the line. And like an offset in the graph editor is kind of how you can tell if you've got overlapping action or not. And then we're going to clean up some of the poses to really help sell it. So first I'll start by setting my initial poses. So in this frame 1, this right foot is almost on the ground. So that means that these hips here are rotated forward on that side. And I actually want the tail to be lagging a little bit behind. That's weird. I really want the tail to be lagging a little bit behind. So that's why I'm going to have it start counter to the foot. So this is overlapping action. It doesn't move in the same way that the hip is rotating. It's moving offset to it. And that'll become evident in a moment. It's like if you cracked a whip, the whole whip doesn't move when you move your hand. It starts a little bit at the end, and then it wraps all the way down. So we're going to offset it a little bit like that. And I'll key it, ask to key it. And I'm going to scrub along the timeline until this pose is switched and the right foot is almost, or the left foot is just about to touch the ground. Great. So I'm going to call it that frame 24, and I'm going to rotate this to the other side. All right, so right now we just have the tail going back and forth. So we'll go back to, when this foot is almost about to touch the ground. So maybe 44. And we can copy our first frame over here as well. So we know it's going to be 44, so click on the first frame, middle mouse drag out to 44. And you could manually rotate this if you want, but I like to know that it's hitting the same point every time. So 44. And then we'll go back and find when this foot's about to hit the ground again, so maybe 62. drag frame 24 up to 62, and this is why I wanted to bump this out so we can see it. And I know the animation ends around frame 80, so let's just copy 44 to frame 80. Great, so you can see now if I play this, and I'll go back to 80 so it loops. We got a little bit of tail, but there's no overlap, it's just moving back and forth. So we need to add the overlap, and I do this in the graph with the graph editor open so I can just see progress. And the first thing I'm going to want to do is just make sure, I'm just going to do a quick visual check. You can kind of see here that the rotate Y is hitting the same high peak as it is the low peak, just about, which means it's a pretty even sine wave, right? And that's what I want in this case. Again, this is not about posing or adding like emotion to this walk cycle really, just getting the overlap. So I'm happy with that. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select this tail, this first tail joint, select all of its keys, copy, go to this joint. I'm going to offset it. So before it was cycling about every 24, so I'm going to go 6 frames. I'm going to go to frame 7, and I'm going to paste this there. So now I copy the same keys from the top one to this one, right? Cool. So we can kind of see it's starting, but we just need to keep it going. So we'll go another 6 frames to frame 13. And paste it again. Now, the only reason I can just copy and paste this, and it's working pretty well already, is these were all zeroed out. These controls were all zeroed out when I started. And the reason it's zeroed out is because I actually posed it with buffer nodes on top. So that's why it's working, even though now if your tail was zeroed out and it was straight out, and you had to drop this control down to pose it, then when you copy the keys, you might have to delete some of these rotates because, if it's getting an extra rotate along X or something, it'll start curling. And we don't want it to curl, we just want it to go back and forth. So again, this method is working because I made sure that these controls were all zeroed out when I was at a neutral pose. I did that when I did the rig. But again, if your rig is straight out, you'll need to isolate one axis, and it's usually rotate X. But that being said, I'll just keep moving on. So I did that control, right? And so offset it again. So I got that one. There's at frame 13, so we're going to 6 frames, frame 19. Paste this. Another 6 frames, frame 25. Paste that. 6 frames to 31. Paste. And 6 frames to 37. Paste. Now, if you look at our rotate Y's, and which is going to be the green lines here, you see that's the first one. I select the second one. It's got the same curve, but it's moved over a little bit because I'm counting every 6 frames. So it's the same curve offset. And as we go down, if I can select the controller, you'll see that it's all offset like that. All right? And that's kind of a sign that you have overlapping action, is if the rotates are offset like that. So if we go ahead and scrub through it now, you'll see that we start to have overlap, but there's something weird happening here, right? Things aren't looking quite right. Well, the reason for that is these controls on the end, they don't actually have any keys at the beginning because we offset it. So what we need to do is go ahead and fill those keys in. So it's pretty easy. We know that from, let's see. From this frame to its next frames, from 37 to 60, that's 23 frames. So let's go just 23 frames the other direction, which, let me figure that out real quick. I know, it's simple math, but I haven't done it. So frame 14, so we're frame 14. And we'll copy frame 60 there on this controller. So 60 down to 14. Oh, that didn't work. Oh, frame 60 to 14. There we go. And you can see in the graph editor that it copied it real nice. And really, like where it crosses here, at frame 0, frame 0, I know it's going to be 0 because it wants to cross that line again. So I'll just set this to 0, and I'll grab that, tweak that out. So now I've completed the curve on that. So now I need to go through and do that with the rest of the controls. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. But so I'll walk through this one, and then I'll just speed up through the other one. So again, from frame 30 to 54, so that's 23, so I need to go back 23 again. I feel like I just did this one. Nope. But, alright, so, and you can also see it in the graph editor here. You can kind of see that I want to maintain that offset, so I know it's about frame 20. So I'm going to grab this, I'm going to grab 54, and really, if I'm going to be exact, it's 21. So I'll go to 21, okay, S, that's 19. And then at 0, it's going to be what's at frame 30 again. So let's get that. So you can see I got my curve, but I put this in the wrong place. It doesn't look quite even. So I'm just going to move that over there. Again, we got to clean it up here. So frame 48 is going to probably be what we need to copy to frame 41 or to frame 1. And yeah, that made a nice curve. That was easy. To this one. So we need to copy. Again, I can see by looking at it, it's going to be more or less 0 at frame 1. So I'm just going to type in 0. And when it's not completing the cycle like this, you grab the curve and change the shape so as if it was completing the motion here. And it's a little far, so I'm going to, it's not really mirroring. We can eyeball this here. It doesn't have to be precise. So that's really a little bit more in line with the rest of the curve. Let's see. This guy will also probably be about 0 at frame 1. Change that out. Oops. This one is probably... Now you can always just select the curve, and when you're at the right frame, insert key. And again, in this case, I'm just going to eyeball it. I'm going to move it down. And I know that's pretty close to the other peak there. So now if we play this animation, it's getting there, but you can see that there's a little bit of, it's not really giving a nice whip action. And the reason for that is because the wave that's traveling down this tail, the total length of that sine wave is actually shorter than the tail. So in the tail at any one given time, we're having more than one cycle of a wave pass through. So that's why if we pause it here, or here's a good point, we've got 2 peaks. We've got, there's a peak of the curve and there's a peak of the curve. But really, in this pose, this should be kind of flared out. So we're going to go ahead and clean up some of these poses, and I'm just going to scrub through the timeline. So here's a good example. Just as the base of the tail starts moving to the right, and the tip of the tail is still moving to the left. But now this whole tail is moving to the left, even though this never kind of whipped around. So I'm going to grab these couple of frames, and I'm going to go over to where there is already a key, and just rotate that out a little bit. So you can see it's changing my curves, so I'll go in and clean those up a little bit. But But you can see now I got a nice whip there. And again, on this side, it's coming back down, but I want it to whip out again. So I'm going to whip that out. And then again here, let's go to the frame. And change it in the graph editor. And I know that it's going to complete its thing here. And then in this last frame, we want that to be a little bit more going that way. So now if we play it, it's going to look a little wonky because the curve isn't clean, and we'll clean that up in a minute. But now we're getting a nice overlap, and you can see it kind of dragging back and forth there. So I'm just going to go ahead and clean up the graphs on this. So again, I don't like the way that is, so I can tell you that it's probably going to need to be, I'm just going to block this. And then this is probably meant to be a peak in about here. And this is where I'm kind of just going to venture from my initial keys here. I'm going to insert a key here. So I can see that there's meant to be a peak here, but it's kind of messy having these other keys in there. So I'll throw a key in the middle, and I'll get the peak that I want. And I'm going to drag this down so you can kind of imagining it continuing into that other side there, something like that. All right, that's looking better. And again, here, this is probably meant to be, would look better like that. Just clean this up a little bit. Make these curves a little cleaner. Something more like that. And then let it play. So there you go. You can see we've got pretty good overlapping action there. It gets a little slow towards the end, so I could go back in and fix some of those curves and tweak it a little bit. But that's a quick way of getting started with overlapping action. Obviously, you'll still need to go in and clean it up a little bit. And overlapping action is one of the principles of animation, so it's good to have even this basic understanding of it. And really, we never really covered, the shapes that we're covering. I was really just talking about how to do it technically. But if you follow through, overlapping action or a wave in animation typically has a C shape. And there's our C shape. Then it goes to S. And use your imagination here, but you can see it's got two curves, right, as an S would. And then it goes back to C. So there's the other C. And then it goes back to S. So there's that S. And the bigger the C, S, C, S shapes are, the bigger the wave would be, the bigger the overlap. That's pretty basic. Again, thanks for putting up with my fairly novice animation skills. I hope it was a little helpful for somebody.